put this program together to help people who work around the industry of energy, electricity, especially if you're in the insurance or risk management portion of that industry. So what the idea of this program is to help you understand the basics of a gas turbine, combustion turbine, to understand the differences, to understand what can go wrong, and to understand how much it costs to fix those things, how long it takes to fix the things that can go wrong, just to get a better understanding of an advanced gas turbine for beginners.
Let's talk about the basics of how they operate. The gas turbine starts with the air inlet where the air is cleaned and filtered. Then the air is moved to the compressor where it is warmed and pressurized, and through the compressor it then goes to the combustors where the fuel is added. Once the fuel and the air combust, the exhaust gases proceed over the turbine blades themselves. 3 or 4 turbine blades that are protected from the extreme heat that they're about to receive from the combustors. Those blades deliver the power that then turns the shaft, which is connected to the generator, giving us electricity, and the generator then puts that power out to the transformers, and the transformers send it to the grid. Some terms you want to get familiar with in the gas turbine world are combustion turbine versus gas turbine. It's pretty simple. Combustion turbines can burn oil or gas, and there are machines that have dual fuel capability. There are machines that actually burn other hydrocarbons as well. Those are specialty machines that you probably won't run across too often. Some more terms you might hear in the industry are aeroderivative or frame engines. An aeroderivative is simply a machine that was born, the design was born in the aerospace industry. So these are going to be gas turbines that you're familiar with connected to airplanes. Some of the differences between aeroderivative and frame are that aeroderivative are smaller, they're easier to maintain, they're quicker starting, they're not as efficient, but they're easier to repair. Sometimes you can have an entire supercore sitting on site ready to swap if you had a failure of your original machine. The frame machines are larger and they're much more efficient, so they make less pollution. A machine that is more efficient means that it's burning less fuel to make the same amount of electricity. If a machine is burning less fuel, it's making less pollution. You might hear about combined cycle systems. In a combined cycle power plant, we have gas turbines and steam turbines. And the concept is that that exhaust gas that went across the turbine blades still has heat in it, and that heat can boil water, which it does through a HRSG, a heat recovery steam generator. Once the steam comes out of the heat recovery steam generator, it goes across the steam turbine, and that's connected to its own generator. So commonly we'll see a gas turbine and a steam turbine, or multiple gas turbines feeding the HRSG so that there's enough steam for a large steam turbine. So we'll see a 2-on-1 configuration. Sometimes you might see 2 2-on-1 configurations at a site, and there would be 6 generators at that site, the 4 gas turbines and the 2 steam turbines. In the gas turbine industry, efficiency has been driving the development of the technology for decades. And the efficiency is in the form of better, higher firing temperatures, more exotic metals that can withstand those higher temperatures, better ability to design the blades based on the stresses that they will undergo. We're able to use computer power now to predict how a blade will operate before we even build it or run it. We have to validate that, and the validation is the period where we might see some failures. The challenges from the higher combustion temperatures are the materials themselves. So we're operating at temperatures above the melting point of the materials that we're using, so we have to protect them from those temperatures, and one way to protect them is just insulation. We coat the first blade or second blade or the first several blades of those turbine blade rows with thermal barrier coating. And the thermal barrier coating is what keeps the heat from melting the blades. In addition to thermal barrier coating, we have cooling holes and we have slots inside the blades so that we can drive compressor air through the blades to cool them down. So what does advanced stage mean? Advanced stage is basically when we're burning the fuel and we're creating temperatures above the melting point of the steel or the alloys that the machine is made of. So we need exotic alloys to handle those temperatures. We need cooling systems within the blades to help protect the blades. We need thermal barrier coatings, which act as insulation to protect the blades. You may hear of E-class machines, F-class machines, G, H machines. You're going to hear these letters and you're initially going to think that it has to do something with the size of the machine. The letter designation is more closely related to the firing temperature of the machine or the firing temperature range of the machine. E-class machines only had air-cooled turbine blades. E-class machines were the first to start operating over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and they only had air-cooled turbine blades. F-class machines came along and they bumped up the firing temperatures to 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. They used aeroderivative compressor sections, dry low-NOx combustors, single crystal turbine blades, and sequential combustion. G and H machines are pushing the envelope even farther. With firing temperatures over 2,500 degrees, these machines need a lot of protection. In addition to all of the previous developments, they have advanced hot gas path cooling systems. G and H also introduced active clearance control. J-class machines are pushing the firing temperatures to over 2,900 degrees Fahrenheit. In addition to everything we've done before, now we have to have more advanced cooling and advanced combustor cooling, as well as advanced thermal barrier coatings. What is prototypical? What is unproven? What is proven? Well, here's what one insurer engineer said to me. We consider a new model to be prototypical until several units have reached 8,000 hours of operation without issues. From there, it would be deemed unproven between 8,000 hours of operation and several fleet leaders having reached the first hot gas path inspection without issues or as long as any issues continue. Once that has been achieved and any lingering issues have been resolved, the designation would be changed to proven. Let's talk a little bit about fatigue. Fatigue is a phenomenon that occurs in a metal when it's subjected to alternating stresses. You've seen it in paper clips. If you've bent it back and forth a time or two too many, then the last time you move it, it breaks. And on that last application of stress, you didn't need to reach the failure point of the steel because the steel was already weakened. The same thing can happen in large rotating machines. Fatigue damage has three distinct processes: crack initiation, crack propagation, and then overload. And so what happens is a stress riser or a manufacturing defect of some sort is when the crack initiates, and then over time we have other forces that can be allowed to grow that crack. Eventually, if that crack gets large enough, the rest of the uncracked metal isn't strong enough to hold the blade on, the blade liberates, and that's overload. High cycle fatigue is a special type of fatigue, and it takes many, many cycles because the stresses involved don't have to be that high. The stresses can be very low, in fact, for high cycle fatigue to be a problem. You find it after it starts. You can't predict it. It's difficult to measure. It can happen in a matter of hours in a machine. For high cycle fatigue to occur, we need more than 1 million cycles. But a gas turbine turning at 3,600 revolutions per minute can develop 1 million cycles within 3.5 hours, 3.6 hours. So that's less than a shift, less than half a shift. We can have a high cycle fatigue event from the initiating point until overload. A special concern with fatigue is resonance. When we have resonance, we have not only the vibration occurring, but we've got the vibration being amplified at certain nodes along the structure. And you've seen this in nature. You've seen this with the Galloping Gurney Bridge, where the wind across the bridge stimulated the bridge to vibrate. And the vibrations caused back and forth modes, alternating stresses back and forth. And then eventually the bridge failed. The same thing can happen on gas turbine blades and compressor blades. The resonance is when you have a vibrating object that is at a frequency that is natural to that object. So another example is the lady singer singing a really high-pitched note, but it's just perfect. She finds the note that is the frequency of the glass and shatters the glass. And that can be done by this concept of resonance, and it's basically an amplification of the forces because of the nodes that are occurring. If you had a long piece of metal that only bowed in one from the ends. If you had a long piece of metal that only bowed from the ends, the only changing or alternating stresses are going to be at the ends. This is where the actual up and down is occurring. The in and out of the blade or of the structure isn't as severe in between the nodes. Now, if you've got a guitar string and you've got two more nodes in between there, just picture that string is bending it not only at the ends, but at each of those harmonics, at each of those resonants. Now, if that's happening to our structure, whether it's a steel beam or a compressor blade, it could excite it to the point where it's above its yield strength and fail. We're going to talk a little bit about stress risers. Stress risers are places in a piece of material that would, because of its geometry, increase the amount of stress if a certain load were applied. So to make it simple, to open a bag of chips, there are little notches cut on the end, and when you tear from that end, it's very easy. If you try to tear the bag from the end that doesn't have the notch, you can get quite frustrated. That's the value of a stress riser when it's intentional. If a stress riser develops in a gas turbine compressor blade or turbine blade, then it's not desirable. And what can happen is that much lower stresses than we anticipated are going to be able to cause the blade to liberate or break. We can look for stress risers through inspections, through borescopes, through eddy current, through dental molds. There's ways to detect stress risers, and a conscientious maintenance program is the best defense against blade liberation from stress risers. There's a common misunderstanding about cyclic operation. I've heard so many engineers say that a machine that operates up and down or that starts and stops many times is going to be more likely to have an event than the machine that just gets up to its normal operating speed and keeps running. The analogy is that the airplane's biggest risks are on takeoffs and landings. There's a different world down here on the ground. And a machine that operates all the time, 100% base load, or weekdays, base load during the weekdays, it's going to ingest a lot more air than a machine that cycles. Now, the machine that cycles is going to heat up and cool down. We know that heating up a piece of material and letting it cool down subjects it to stress. And we also design the material to withstand that, but it can still have an effect on the material. So where does the damage occur in a machine that cycles? A machine that cycles is going to expose its heat affected areas. So the combustors, the turbine blades, the exhaust tunnel, all the parts of the machine that get hot and cool down. The air inlets are not being subjected to any risk when the machine's not running. On a base load machine, the air inlet and the front end of the compressor then become the risky area, because this is where we start to see the losses. And the type of losses that we see on the back end of the machine are in the single-digit millions. The kind of losses that we see on the front end of the machine are double-digit million-dollar losses. So to just make a blanket statement that cycling machines are more risky is naive. Understand that all we're doing is moving the risk from one section of the machine to another.